week, of course, the country will be wrapping up the 16 days of activism against violence on women and children campaign. While we continue to condemn and speak out against the horrors of this pandemic, women are still at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to economic and financial inclusion. Now, to dissect this matter, I'm joined by two guests at the moment. I've got my panelist here, Ms. Namhla Mniki, who is the SDG Symposium convener that took place recently, and Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso, who is the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. Ladies, thank you very much for your time. Before I begin our discussion, I would like to play a clip taken out of an interview I did last week, Monday, with Ms. Mniki around that SDGs Symposium. Take a listen, and then we'll begin our discussion.
We fantasize about a localized people's economy, but when we invest in our economy, what we think about really is foreign direct investors and those big people. So the main practical solution that we came up with was there's a way that we can localize our economy by making sure that productivity happens in township economies and in rural areas.
Productivity should happen in townships and in rural areas. That's what, Ms. Mniki, you said to me last week. And I got excited because you went further and spoke about what you want to be established. You mentioned business innovation hubs could be a way where women in townships and rural areas who are really bearing the brunt of financial and economic exclusion in our country could have access in that. And then you mentioned government's role. But I thought, let's find out how business thinks. So I'm joined by you and Ms. Busisiwe Mavuso from Business Leadership South Africa. She's the big boss there, the CEO of BLSA. Ladies, welcome, and thank you very much for your time. We've got about 10 minutes for this conversation. Ms. Mavuso, you've just had Ms. Mniki from last week saying, we fantasize about foreign direct investment in the country, but we need to localize our efforts in townships and rural areas to benefit women. What's your initial reaction when you hear that?
Dan, thank you very much. I think Namhla is actually spot on, but I think let's realize and let's appreciate that for us to be able to get localization right, for us to be able to get the township economy going, for us to be able to get the rural economy going, you need investment. It doesn't happen on its own. Economic activity is spurred by investment. So I don't think that we can actually look at these two, as actually mutually exclusive, because they are not. Because remember, for economic activity to get going, you need money to be invested in the country, because that is how you actually take a chunk of money and say, I'm actually going to invest, in townships and be able to give people grants or loans to be able to set up businesses. I need to be able to set up factories in rural areas so that people don't have to migrate to the cities and. So, but then without investment, that cannot happen. And I think if you talk to the issue of localization, you actually have to look at, is the policy framework right for localization to happen in this country? If this government continues to allow cheap China imports, if this government continues to allow dumping practices, if this government doesn't protect, the local producers and manufacturers, then those township economies are not going to have the light of day, because then you're going to have a group of women who are going to start businesses in townships. But if, they are competing against, dumping products, if they are competing against cheap China imports, then people are obviously going to go and buy something for 10 rands. They are not going to buy it for 50 rands. Because it's proudly South African and it's locally produced. So when we talk about the right policy framework and investment, then that is precisely what we're talking about.
We mentioned foreign direct investment. Ms. Mniki will speak for herself. I don't want to put words in her mouth. But what about local business? What about the role of our own South African businesses in helping with the localization? I understand your point about that we need the right policy framework. Everybody takes that's essential, but government must facilitate. But business, local business, investing in those economies?
I think if you look at who the local business is, if you look at the 400-odd JSE-listed companies, you will see that 85% of those are actually international companies. So I don't think we can avoid the issue of foreign direct investment, because local businesses are not big enough and they are not strong enough to spare the economic activity in this country. So those big businesses that we're talking about, JSE listed companies, they might have presence in South Africa, but when they have to invest, they have to go to their headquarters in France, in Japan, in Germany, and whatever the case is. And that is where, the sign-offs for these investments actually have to happen. So unfortunately, as South Africa, let's agree that we are not emancipated when it comes to investment, that we actually, don't have enough muscle to actually do this on our own. We still need, assistance from
abroad.
From international.
Yeah. So, Ms. Mniki, let me bring you here because you're the one who got me excited and said, let me have this conversation. You are hearing there, Ms. Mavuso saying we depend on foreigners for that investment. You want it to be there, but you also made a point last week to me that it's a partnership and collaboration with government. She's making a point of the right policy framework. When you hear Ms. Mavuso speaking on behalf of business and saying the things she's saying, what's top of mind for you in trying to bring about that dream of yours with your colleagues to make sure that women are empowered in our townships and in our rural economies?
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Such a pleasure to be here. I think I love the fact that you are helping us to localize who is the investor we're talking about. The context of the symposium was to say South Africa is about to invest trillions. The South African public sector is about to invest trillions into business in an effort to recover from COVID. And one of the strongest things we're saying is stop directing the money in such a way that you are busy trying to attract people from outside the country who are called foreign direct investors. Basically, what we're saying is that of the pots of money that currently exist already, usually the bias is to put those monies in giving tax incentives to mining companies, as an example. And we're saying you need to realize and have a different perspective of where value lies in South Africa. Value long-term and medium-term in South Africa is going to lie in the ability of ordinary South Africans to produce goods, to produce services, and to bring them to market. And so the resources that currently exist, we're not talking about resources we still need to search for. The resources that exist in our economy right now should be directed at local markets. And so we don't have a question mark around where is the money going to come from, because our government has already told us that there is money that's going to be invested in at the top 9 or 10 industries in this country. Where is that money going? We are saying activate local economies. But in terms of the business sector as well, this is important because even though these companies are international, they are registered in South Africa, they are bound by South African laws. And so when Ms. Mavuso says it's important to have the policy framework right, I think she's spot on. There are ways that we can make sure that those businesses are actually completely connected to local supply chains. Just because they are international doesn't mean that all of the majority of their supply chains have to come outside South Africa. So one of the big asks that I have for business, for instance, I was going to talk to you about what then was, can we think about, as we go into 2021, can we think about a supply chain strengthening process with business? This is how business can meet communities halfway, is to say, if I am in this particular industry, I'm going to identify opportunities for the local suppliers, for the local producers as business, and that this is an activity that business can go into by identifying those opportunities, figuring out how to connect women and young people to those supply chains, and that means they have to really change their procurement culture.
Okay.
Because right now the procurement culture. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I know we can get. We don't have much time, but you're making the points, Ms. Mavuso. When you hear that, can an organization like yours, BLSA, assist in ensuring that those available trillion of rands, billions of rands, government is directing through business for projects to revive our economy, do what Ms. Mniki says? Are you able to influence that as an organization with your members to say, guys, this is what we should do now?
So I think if you talk about that is coming from government, you have to ask yourself the question, where does the money come from? Because we know we are facing a fiscal crisis in this country. We are facing a fiscal cliff. This government doesn't have money. So if this government is talking about money that it has in its coffers, it's money that it has actually brought in from international, funders and
lenders
and investors. Right? And I think we've just come from the investment summit, Bhutan. I think we saw the pledges, we saw the 664 billion that the president was talking about that was pledged in 2018, 2019. Pledged by who? It is pledged by the same international investors, and they therefore, have a view in terms of in what spaces do you want to invest in what industries, in what. Of course, government can give them a sense and give them a view and direct them to say that these are the industries that we actually want to boost. But because it comes from international investors, it already comes with conditionalities. So let's probably appreciate that, we actually, there is a lot of dependency, of the South African economy from these international players, and I guess through policy, we can probably maybe strengthen and maybe tighten the rules around which they can actually play in
Busisiwe, how do we find a solution as business to assist women to be included in the way that is practical from what Ms. Mniki is saying? As we conclude here, what do you think would be the best way, and very briefly, what do you think would be the best way that business can really come to the party, understanding all these limitations you've outlined?
So as much as I'm not a fan of overregulation, but I would really say, business has actually failed to come to the party for the past 26 years, Bhutan on this one, right? In terms of BBBE, in terms of EE, in terms of local producers and whatever the case is, let's legislate it. Rather than waiting for business to do the right thing, introduce policy that will force business in South Africa to actually buy from local producers. But as you're doing that, introduce protectionist measures for local producers so that they don't have to be overtaken by cheap imports from China and from.
Interesting. I never thought I'll hear a day when a business person will want more regulation. Thank you very much. But I hear your point. Ms. Mniki, final parting word from you when you hear that. Would you welcome more regulation in terms of policy for business to be made or incentivized, so to speak, to do the right thing, to make sure that women are fully included in our economy?
Absolutely. In fact, if you saw me, I started clapping when she said that, because we do need to get business, even if they are international, we do need to get them to start strengthening local supply chains. And so regulation to that effect would be perfect. But you know what? Countries are built through co-creation and collaboration. So business needs to come to the table and say, we want to support this nation to succeed. We want to support the women of this nation to succeed. Can you strengthen your supply chains by localizing them? That's the key ask. 2021 is going to be a year of hope if you start strengthening your local supply chains.
I'm hoping Ms. Mavuso will carry that message to PLSA as well. She's nodding her head. She's hearing you loud and clear. Ms. Mniki, Ms. Mavuso, thank you very much for your time this morning as we're talking about how can the country make sure our women are included fully in the economy. Good suggestions there.